he said. "Wait here, Mum. I'll be right back." I waited 3 hours on a bench with my bags. Then I realized he wasn't coming back. I waited 3 hours on a bench with my bags at my feet, watching strangers come and go. By the time the sky darkened and the streetlights blinked on, I finally realized he wasn't coming back. Not late, not lost, just gone. The bench was metal, cold even through my coat, and the bags beside me held everything I'd brought: 3 cardigans, 1 photo album, 2 pairs of shoes, my rosary, and the old blue tin with the papers he thought I'd thrown away years ago. I didn't cry. Not even when the woman at the kiosk started closing up and offered me a pitying glance. I only nodded. "Still waiting," I said, like a fool rehearsing loyalty as if it were a virtue. He hadn't said anything cruel that morning, just rushed. "Quick stop, Mum. Need to run into the office. Won't be long. Wait here, okay?" Then keys jingling, door shutting, the back of his car blending into traffic. I didn't even get to say thank you for the ride. The ache didn't come all at once. It trickled in through the back, like cold draft through an old window. Not the abandonment. No, that I'd braced for, deep down. What stung was the planning. The calm way he asked me to wait. Like a script. Like he'd rehearsed it. And the worst part? I had almost believed he meant to return. At some point, maybe the 2nd hour, maybe after the 3rd, I stood, slow and careful, my knees stiff from the bench. I looked around the terminal, then down at my hands. Still steady, still here. "Enough," I whispered. Not with anger, just certainty. The motel 2 blocks away didn't ask for ID. I paid cash, signed the ledger M.L. Sutton, and smiled when the clerk didn't blink. The room smelled faintly of bleach and something older. Perhaps disappointment. I laid my bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed without removing my coat. Then I opened the blue tin. Inside, wrapped in wax paper between old church bulletins and a faded receipt for pot roast, were 3 documents: the deed to the house, notarized in 1996, the durable power of attorney from 2008, and a copy of the will, signed in my late husband's crabbed hand. All 3 with my name on them. Not his. Mine. He had forgotten. Or perhaps never knew. But I remembered. Always. The next morning, I called Daniel Marks, my husband's oldest friend and our attorney for 37 years. "Mary?" he said, his voice thick with sleep but steady. "You all right?" "I need to see you," I said. "Today, if possible." He didn't ask why. At 11 a.m., I sat in his wood-panelled office, the walls lined with books no one had touched in decades, the same coat over my shoulders, the same bags at my feet. I placed the documents on his desk. He looked up at me, expression unreadable. "He left me at a bus station," I said. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He leafed through the papers, slowly, carefully. When he reached the last page, he looked up again. "You're the sole legal owner," he said. "He has no claim. I want to sell it." He nodded, quietly. "As possible?" We spent the next hour reviewing paperwork, updating signatures, authorizing actions I hadn't taken in years. I left with a folder tucked under my arm and the number of a discreet realtor named Carla, whom Daniel assured me was both capable and tactful. At the motel, I removed my shoes for the first time in 24 hours and stood at the window watching buses come and go. I wondered briefly what my son had told his wife. Maybe I wandered off. Maybe I refused to get in the car. Maybe he hadn't mentioned me at all. None of it mattered. That night, I boiled water for tea, using the motel's ancient kettle, and cradled the mug in both hands as steam rose toward my face. The tile was cracked, the blanket too thin. But the silence, oh, the silence was mine. The motel mirror was small and scratched, but it showed enough. I looked at myself that morning, not out of vanity, but because I needed to see her. The woman who had waited on a bench for 3 hours and still hadn't broken. My hair was flattened from sleep, my cheeks pale, but my spine stayed straight. I called Carla just after 9. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp, no nonsense. "Daniel said you might call," she said. "He didn't tell me much, but I gather this is a discreet situation." "That's one way to put it." "I can meet you today?" she offered. "Anywhere you're comfortable." "Not the house," I said. "Not yet." We met at a diner. She was younger than I expected, 40 maybe, with a calm presence and the kind of eyes that read between lines. She ordered coffee and didn't ask why I didn't touch mine. Instead, she opened a notebook and said, "Let's talk through the property." I told her about the house. Built in 1952, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a creaky porch and roses that bloomed every May because I made sure they did. I told her about the updates my husband and I had done over the years, the permits still filed in the drawer beneath the cutlery. I didn't tell her about the son who now slept in my room, or the daughter-in-law who once rolled her eyes when I forgot to label leftovers. I didn't need to. Carla understood. "I can have a photographer there by tomorrow morning," she said. "We'll keep it off the public listing. Private showings only. Pre-qualified buyers. I'll handle everything. You don't need to speak to anyone unless you want to." "I don't," I said. "I want it gone." "All right." We signed documents over a vinyl booth, my signature steady on every line. She gave me a copy and tucked hers into a slim folder. "You'll get updates by email," she said. "But I'll call when we get an offer." I thanked her. She paused, then asked, "Will anyone else be surprised when the sign goes up?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, but I won't be." I walked back to the motel slowly, past the station where I'd sat 2 nights ago. The bench was empty now. The sun was higher. Everything looked sharper, as if even the air had decided to move forward. That afternoon, I pulled out the photo album I'd packed. Not out of nostalgia, just to remind myself. There he was, my son, age 5, in overalls, holding a frog with both hands like a prize. His smile was all teeth. I used to think that smile would save us both. I didn't cry. Not then. The phone stayed silent that day. He hadn't called. Not to check. Not to explain. Not to lie. I found that comforting in a strange way. Cowardice makes people quiet. And silence, for once, was working in my favor. The next morning, Carla texted me 2 words. "It's listed." I didn't respond. Instead, I called Daniel again. "Do you still have the copy of the trust we filed in 2008? I asked. He chuckled softly. "Mary, I've kept every piece of paper you ever signed. What do you need?" "I want it updated, and I want to add a clause." "What kind of clause?" I paused, then said it clearly. "No descendant or family member not explicitly named is to inherit or occupy the property. Ever. Not even temporarily." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood." I spent the rest of the day quietly. I walked 3 blocks to a small grocery store, bought tea and a loaf of bread, and made toast in the motel microwave with a paper napkin as a plate. It was the best toast I'd had in years. That night, I dreamt of the house. Not the way it looked now, cluttered with someone else's tastes, but the way it used to be. Saturday mornings with open windows, my husband painting the hallway while humming old songs, my son running barefoot through the kitchen, a wooden spoon in one hand, chasing nothing. I woke with my pillow damp and the taste of peppermint in my mouth. I had forgotten I put a mint on my tongue before sleeping. There is a kind of grief that doesn't announce itself with sobs or wailing. It sits beside you like an old friend, hands folded, waiting. That was the grief I carried now, not of loss, but of remembering too much. By Friday, Carla had 2 private showings scheduled. The second buyer is serious, she told me over the phone. Divorced, early 60s, no kids, looking for something peaceful. She asked if the roses would stay. They will, I said. They belong to the soil more than to me. The next morning, I packed my bags again, not because I was fleeing, because I was ready to choose my next place. Not the house where I was born, not the guest room where I wasn't welcome, but something mine, even if it was small, even if it was temporary, as long as it was quiet. The sky was overcast when Carla called. Her voice carried a hint of energy, the kind people get when things move quickly. "We have an offer," she said. "Full asking. No contingencies. Cash buyer. Wants to close within 10 days. I didn't speak right away. I looked around the motel room, the chipped veneer table, the 2 worn chairs, my suitcase resting quietly in the corner like a guest who knew it wasn't staying long. Then I said, "Send it to Daniel. I'll sign whatever he clears." "Of course," she said. "And congratulations." That word sat strange in the air, not bitter, just foreign. This didn't feel like winning. It felt like finishing something long overdue. By mid-afternoon, Daniel called. "Everything checks out," he said. "We can proceed. But there's a note here, the buyer's agent included. She's asking for your permission to keep the climbing rosebush." I smiled. "Tell her it doesn't need my permission. It never listened to me anyway." He chuckled, the sound warm and small. "Mary, I know this isn't easy." "Daniel," I said, "nothing about this is hard anymore. It's just necessary." I signed the transfer forms in his office. My signature was steady, the pen dragging evenly across each page. With every line I completed, I felt something loosen. Not grief, not pride, just a kind of exhale I hadn't known I'd been holding since the first slammed door. He watched me sign, then slid the papers into a folder. "It's done," he said quietly. That evening, I didn't go back to the motel. I walked instead, 3 long city blocks in my sensible shoes, down streets that still smelled faintly of late summer heat and bus exhaust. At the corner of 5th and Linden, I entered a furnished rental office and asked for a 1-bedroom on the quiet side. The woman behind the desk blinked. "Furnished short-term?" "No," I said. "I'm staying a while." She glanced at my worn coat and suitcase. "Do you have any income?" "Liquid," I said. "And recent." She nodded, handed me a clipboard. I filled it out with a clarity that comes only after someone has tried to erase you and failed. I moved in 2 days later. The apartment was nothing grand. A modest space on the 2nd floor, beige walls, creaky windows. But it was mine. No one else's schedule, no one else's rules. I rearranged the kitchen to my liking, placed the kettle near the sink, and moved a single chair to face the window. On the 3rd night, as I watched city lights flicker against the sky, Carla texted, "Closed. Buyer takes possession Friday. Congratulations again." This time the word sat softer. Still not joy, but something near it. Completion. I didn't call my son. I didn't send a note. I simply mailed the required notice of possession transfer. It arrived by certified envelope, signed for by someone at the house I once planted azaleas in front of. I imagined the moment he opened it. The confusion, the slow dread, the realization. What I did not imagine, what I refused to indulge, was the apology that would never come. Instead, I sat in my new kitchen, steeped mint tea in my favorite mug, the one I packed even when I had no room, and added a small ceramic pot to the balcony rail. Mint, again. A tribute, not a tradition. Later that week, Carla called one last time. The buyer asked if she could write you a note. Would that be okay? I considered. If she wants. A day later, the letter arrived. Handwritten on cream paper. Ms. Sutton, your home is beautiful. I felt something the moment I stepped inside, not the finishes or the space, but the feeling of it. It felt lived in, loved. Whatever happened before, I hope you know you built something good. I'll take care of it. Margot. I folded the letter, placed it inside the photo album between the picture of my son with the frog and one of my husband painting the porch. Not because I needed to remember, but because I wanted the truth to live somewhere besides my chest. He was a colicky baby, red-faced and loud from the moment he entered the world. I remember the nurse handing him to me, swaddled and wailing, and I thought, well, at least he's got lungs. My husband stood behind me, one calloused hand on my shoulder, the other reaching awkwardly toward the baby like he might break him. We named him Jonathan, not for anyone, just because it felt kind. I used to whisper it to him when he cried at night. Jonathan, baby, hush now. It's all right. Mama's here. He calmed quicker when I said his name. That first winter, we couldn't afford heat past 9 p.m., so I wrapped him in double sleepers and tucked hot water bottles near his crib. My husband worked 2 jobs back then, warehouse by day, gas station by night. I stayed home, not because it was easy, but because someone had to hold the house together while it creaked and shifted under the weight of bills and exhaustion. I remember holding Jonathan against my chest, both of us dozing in the recliner. His breath warm against my collarbone, his tiny hand curled in the fabric of my shirt. He had this way of sighing in his sleep, like even his dreams were too much. When he was 5, he brought home a drawing from preschool. Stick figures, holding hands beneath a triangle roof. "That's us," he said, pointing. "That's Daddy, and that's you, and that's me, and that's our house." I hung it on the fridge and kept it there until the paper yellowed at the edges. By 10, he'd developed a quiet stubbornness. Not cruel, not yet, just private. He didn't talk about school much. I packed his lunches anyway. Ham and mustard, apple slices, a cookie if we had enough flour that week. He never thanked me, but sometimes he left the cookie uneaten and told me to take it. "You like them more than I do," he'd mutter, embarrassed by the softness of the gesture. At 17, he wanted to quit school. "I'm not smart like the others," he said. "I'll just work." I sat with him at the kitchen table for over an hour, my hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. I didn't raise my voice. I told him he was enough, just as he was. I told him work would always wait. But growing into a person you could live with was something else entirely. He stayed, graduated late, but graduated. When he got married, I wore my mother's brooch and kept quiet when his wife asked if I could maybe wait to move in with them someday, not now. I didn't question her tone. I just smiled and baked an extra tray of rolls for the reception. When my husband died, Jonathan held my elbow during the funeral but left early, said he had a conference call. That was the first time I realized we were no longer tethered, not by need, not even by grief. Just blood. And blood, it turns out, is a thinner thread than I'd been taught to believe. Still, I stayed in his life the way old furniture stays in a room. Quiet, useful, out of the way. I helped with their first child, then their second. I watered their plants, folded their towels, remembered anniversaries even when they forgot mine. When they offered to let me stay for a while, after my knees started failing and my house got too quiet, I said yes, without asking what a while meant. I thought it was kindness. I see now it was something closer to guilt. The rules came slowly. No strong smells in the kitchen. No leaving the bathroom light on. No TV after 9. No humming. It's just too constant, she had said, with a strained smile. And Jonathan? He said nothing. Not when I gave up my home. Not when I sold my car. Not when I went from mother to tenant in their eyes. So when he said, "Wait here, Mum, I'll be right back," he wasn't lying. Not really. He was just continuing a truth I hadn't wanted to see, that I had been waiting for years. Waiting to be seen. To be remembered. To be someone again. Not just Mom. Lowercase. Convenient. Invisible. That day on the bench wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment I finally stopped pretending it hadn't already ended. I didn't go back to the house. Not right away. I drove past it once. Slow. Like someone circling a memory she wasn't sure she wanted to open. The curtains were different now. Her taste, not mine. The porch light that used to flicker had been replaced. Everything looked the same from the outside, but I knew better. I knew what had shifted. Instead, I stayed in my new apartment, unpacked slowly, lined up my shoes in the closet, placed the wedding photo of me and Frank on the dresser, the one in the frame he carved himself. He'd been gone 12 years, and yet his eyes still looked like a promise I once believed in. The days passed quietly. Carla kept me updated with texts. One showing confirmed for Wednesday. Second buyer interested, wants a walkthrough Friday. I never asked who these people were. It didn't matter. I wasn't picking someone to love the house. I was picking someone to take it, like cutting a cord that had already frayed to threads. On Thursday, Carla called. "There's a woman," she said. Late 50s, divorced, moved here after her mother passed. She walked the yard for 10 minutes before ringing the bell. Said the garden felt familiar. That caught me. "The garden?" I asked. She asked if the rosemary was original. "It is," I said. "I planted it the spring after we bought the house. Frank built the bed from old fence posts, said it would hold." "It's still holding," Carla said softly. "She's making an offer." That night I sat by my window, the city humming below like a lullaby only old women and bus drivers understand. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and pressed a hand to my chest. Not in pain, just to feel the beat. Steady, present. The offer came the next morning. Full price, all cash, no contingencies. I signed the acceptance papers without ceremony, no music, no prayer. Just a blue pen, and a name I hadn't written with such clarity in years, Mary Louise Sutton. Carla texted, "You're officially in escrow." I didn't celebrate. I folded laundry. I made tea. I watered the mint. But that evening, I wrote a letter. Not long, not bitter. "Jonathan, you left me at the station. I waited 3 hours. It felt like enough time to finally understand. I'm not angry. I'm simply awake now. The house was mine. Always was. It no longer is. You'll receive the notice soon. You don't have to call. I don't need answers. I already have mine. Mum, I didn't sign it with love. Not because I didn't feel any, but because that word had become too elastic in his hands, stretched until it lost its shape." Daniel sent the letter along with the legal documents, registered mail, proof of receipt. 3 days later, the phone rang. I let it ring. He didn't leave a message. He never did like recording his voice. Too easy to play back. The 4th day, Carla sent a message. "Buyer wants to meet you, just to say thank you." I stared at the text. Then typed, "Tell her she already did." Because that garden she walked through, the rosemary, the stubborn rose, the cracked stepping stones, Those were my words. That was how I said goodbye. The papers closed quietly, like a book no one finished reading. No ceremony, no final chapter recap. Just a call from Daniel, brief and certain. "It's done, Mary." The wire came through. "You're no longer the owner." I thanked him. He hesitated, then said, "How are you feeling?" I looked out the window at the mint plants leaning toward the sun. Settled. Later that morning, I walked to the bank and asked to transfer the full sum into a savings account under my name alone. No co-signers, no contingencies, no one else's fingerprints on it. The clerk smiled, polite but distant, the way people are when they see grey hair and think slowness. I let her think it. That same afternoon, Carla sent me a photo, Margot, the buyer, standing on the front steps with a small box in her hands. Her smile wasn't wide, just honest. In the background, the door was open. My door. Not anymore. I looked at the image for a long time, not with sadness, with recognition. She had unpacked her life where I had packed mine. By the weekend, the neighborhood had started to buzz. Whispers, like steam from a kettle. Soft at first, then sharp. A neighbor who still called me Miss Mary texted, "Saw a moving truck outside your old place. Thought you were living there with your son?" I didn't respond. 2 days later, another message. "Did you sell it? What happened?" Still nothing. Let them wonder. I imagine Jonathan came home that afternoon to find a stranger's car in the driveway. I imagine he used his key, only to find the locks changed. I imagine him reading the posted notice, taped to the door in quiet, permanent ink. New ownership, effective immediately. Occupants have 7 days to vacate, or legal action will follow. It was the same paper he'd made me sign years ago, just in case. Back when he thought control meant safety. Now it meant consequences. That evening, the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it buzz. Then it rang again, and again. By the 7th call, I turned the volume off and placed it face down. Not avoidance, boundaries. The next morning, I sat on the apartment balcony with my tea, the mint leaves steeping gently. Across the street, a woman walked her dog, nodding to no one in particular. The city moved around me like it always had, fast, indifferent, alive, and I felt something rare, untouched. Midday, Carla forwarded a voicemail. "She's pretending to be the rightful owner," she wrote. "Tried to dispute the sale. I ended the call." I read her note twice. Then I replied simply, "Thank you." No further explanation needed. Not now. That evening I made soup, from scratch. No one told me I used too much garlic. No one hovered behind me with polite suggestions or health tips from an app. Just me, a wooden spoon, the slow simmer of something earned. When the final bowl was poured and the dishes dried, I stood by the window and watched the sky shift. The light fell the same way it had on the porch of that house. But this view, it was mine. I didn't go out looking for him, but the city has a way of folding itself, making unlikely things feel inevitable. 1 week after the sale, I was walking toward the post office when I saw him, Jonathan, standing on the front porch of what used to be my house. He wasn't alone. 2 men stood beside him, one holding a clipboard, the other with a camera. Realtors, I guessed. Or maybe lawyers. Jonathan was gesturing with his hands, animated in that way he used to be when telling stories that weren't entirely true. He laughed once, quick and thin. A noise people make when they're hoping to sell something before someone notices the cracks. He didn't see me. I stood across the street, behind the cover of a laurel hedge, and watched. The porch looked smaller. The paint was still chipping on the side he never bothered to fix. The light by the door had been changed to something sleek and soulless. But the rosebush remained, climbing, stubborn, alive. Margot opened the door then. She didn't smile. She said something short, pointed, and the men nodded. Jonathan stepped back. His mouth moved, his hands still lifted in negotiation. She didn't flinch. And then I saw it. The paper. She handed it to him. One sheet, crisp and folded once. He opened it, read, and his face slackened. Not anger, not shame. Just that quiet unraveling of someone who realizes the rules were never his to begin with. I stepped back before he turned. That night, I boiled potatoes, mashed them with butter and salt, no milk, just the way Frank liked. I set a plate for one and ate without rush. For dessert, a single square of chocolate, hidden in the back of the drawer for years. It tasted faintly of dust and memory. The next morning, the phone rang again. Same number. No voicemail. He still couldn't say it. Couldn't form the sentence. You were right. I was wrong. He never could. Instead, I received a text. I think we need to talk. This got out of hand. I stared at it. Then deleted it. Not blocked, just erased. Later that week, I passed by the neighborhood again. Out of habit, not intention. From across the street, I saw her, Margot, watering the garden. She wore gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. The way she leaned into the task told me she wasn't posing. She was working. The neighborhood children rode by on bikes, loud and loose-limbed. One waved. She waved back. No fanfare, just presence. It struck me then, not just that she had taken my place, but that she honored it. She lived there, not performed there. And oddly, that felt like justice. I kept walking, didn't slow, didn't turn again. I didn't send the letter with spite in my chest. It wasn't about teaching him a lesson or making him squirm. That kind of justice always felt cheap to me, like shouting into a canyon just to hear your own echo. No, this was something quieter. A full stop where he'd left a hanging sentence. Daniel mailed it for me. Certified. Tracked. Delivered 2 days after escrow closed. 1 day after he tried calling me 5 times in a row. I imagined the envelope arriving in their new mailbox, unfamiliar now, no longer shaped by my habits. I imagined his wife collecting it, her polished nails flipping through coupons and sale flyers before landing on my handwriting. He would open it in the kitchen, probably. The same kitchen where I once made his favorite soup after his wisdom teeth came out. The one where I folded towels he never noticed and washed dishes they left in the sink overnight because Mum likes to help. I kept it short. Jonathan, there is no anger left in me and no apologies left in you. This house belonged to me. That's a fact, not a fight. You left me on a bench with bags at my feet. You said you'd be right back. You weren't. And now, I'm not either. Mom, no love, no always. Not even a closing line, just the weight of what was true. I didn't expect a reply. I wasn't asking for one. But silence came, and it came fast. No calls, no texts, no doorbell. I pictured the envelope on the counter, his name on it in my steady handwriting, so unlike the mother he'd imagined he could forget. The woman at the post office had asked, "Return address?" "No," I'd said. "He knows who I am." And that was the whole point. I didn't go out much that week, not from fear, from peace. I read the newspaper. I sat with my feet in warm water. I cleaned the silver cross that had belonged to my mother and placed it in the drawer with the birth certificates and old pension statements. No one had asked for it in decades. It was still mine. Then, 3 days after the letter was delivered, I got an email from Carla. "He's out. Left a note for the buyer. No mess, no damage, just gone." That was all she said. That was all I needed. I imagined him packing, not in fury but confusion, not knowing how it had turned so quiet. He was used to reaction, to fuss, to women pleading for clarity. But I'd given none, and in that absence, he'd finally felt the boundary of me. The silence, at first, was mine, deliberate, measured, the kind that settles in your bones like evening light, unbothered, unhurried, complete. But then, his noise came. The first voicemail was short. "Mum, I think we need to talk." He sounded winded, like he'd run up a flight of stairs or chased an answer that didn't want to be caught. I deleted it before it ended. The second was longer. "This got out of hand. You didn't have to. I mean, we could have." He trailed off. I imagined him pacing. His voice still carried that tone he used when trying to sound reasonable while rearranging facts. He always assumed calmness gave him authority. By the fifth message, the frustration began to leak in. "I don't know what Daniel told you, but this isn't fair. I didn't mean to leave you. Things got complicated." His voice cracked. Maybe real. Maybe rehearsed. I listened to none of them in full. I heard enough to recognize the shape of the old pattern. Him reaching out just enough to feel virtuous, never enough to make it true. The texts came next. First one. "Can we meet?" Just once. Then 3 more. "Please. I didn't know. You could have just talked to me." The irony burned. I had talked. In dinners made. In errands run. In small sacrifices passed off as routine. I had spoken in ways he chose never to translate. I responded to none. By day 4, the messages stopped altogether. I knew he wasn't done. Men like him didn't surrender. They withdrew, regrouped, rewrote. Somewhere, even now, he was probably telling someone a version of events where he was the confused son, abandoned by a mother who overreacted. The story would be soft at the edges, careful in the details, with just enough sorrow to earn sympathy. Let him tell it. I didn't need my side explained. I had lived it. There's a quiet power in being unreachable. Not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped explaining to people who prefer misunderstanding. There's a clarity in no longer adjusting your tone, your volume, your face, to no longer soften truths for someone who never softened his distance. I spent those days doing what women like me rarely get praised for: resting. Not out of weakness, but as a declaration. I took long walks with no purpose, cooked what I liked, when I liked. I let the dishes sit in the sink an hour longer than usual. I lit a candle for myself, not for memory. I said nothing. And in that nothing, I rebuilt. Once, I would have called a friend just to vent, but I've outlived most of them, and the few who remain, I protect from this story. It's not a tale I want passed around like gossip in a church hallway. It's mine. One evening, my neighbor knocked. A woman about my age with tired eyes and a pie she clearly didn't make herself. "I saw you moved in alone," she said. "Thought maybe you'd like some company." I invited her in, not out of politeness, but because she didn't ask questions. We sat, 2 quiet women, sharing borrowed pie and stories that didn't require full disclosure. She mentioned her daughter. I didn't mention my son. She didn't press. As she left, she turned and said, "You seem like someone who knows when to walk away." I smiled. I used to be someone who waited on benches. Not anymore. I never told anyone what he did. Not directly. Not with names. Not with scandal in my mouth. That wasn't the point. But stories have a way of blooming in the places where silence once grew. It started with a phone call from Lorraine, a woman who used to sit beside me in church before my knees gave up the pews. Her voice was cautious, not nosy, gentle in that way older women speak when they sense the ground is fragile. "I ran into Carla at the co-op," she said. She mentioned you'd sold the house. I did, I answered. Long pause. I thought you were living with Jonathan? I was. Another pause, longer this time. She didn't press. I didn't fill the space. Well, she said finally, people noticed you weren't at his youngest's birthday, thought maybe you were sick. No, I said. Just done. She didn't laugh. She didn't ask what that meant. But 2 days later, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just handwriting I knew from potluck sign-up sheets. Some of us saw. We just didn't know what to say. There's a particular kind of heartbreak in that sentence. The kind that isn't yours, but still finds your ribs. Some of us saw. That meant they also didn't help, but I understood. People often wait until it's safe to speak truth. I don't fault them anymore. I just don't wait for them either. Then came the grocery store whispers. The pharmacist who blinked a little longer when handing me my prescription. The woman in the bread aisle who offered me her spot in line, though I was clearly behind her. None of them said it outright, but something had shifted. And Jonathan, he felt it. I know because Carla called one morning, her voice lower than usual. He reached out, she said. Tried to file a complaint with the board. On what grounds? He claimed coercion, said you were manipulated into the sale. I didn't laugh. I just said, let the papers speak. They did, she replied. Board dismissed it in less than 5 minutes. That same week, I received another message. This one from Ruth, who runs the Tuesday knitting circle. We'd never been close, just pleasant. She wrote, saw him at the hardware store, told everyone you were off visiting cousins. Some of us just nodded. But not all of us. I read the message twice, not because it surprised me, but because of that last line. But not all of us. I never wanted vengeance. That was his game, controlling the story, sculpting narratives that made him the misunderstood son. I didn't need to rewrite his version. I just removed myself from it. And when you remove yourself from someone's lie, you leave their words exposed, unbacked, unwitnessed. They start to sound hollow. I once thought dignity meant staying quiet, absorbing the blows with grace. But I've learned it's something else entirely, knowing when silence is your defense and when it's your announcement. People began to notice not because I spoke, but because he couldn't stop explaining. Men like him don't know how to exist without a story that makes them right. But the longer they talk, the more the truth leaks out. He came on a Tuesday. No warning, no message. Just a knock at the door while the kettle was on and my feet were still warm from the sun. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I knew. Some people carry a presence like perfume you once wore. Familiar, cloying, impossible to forget. I opened the door slowly. He stood there in a pressed shirt, the one he saved for court dates and job interviews. Hair combed, face carefully arranged. I noticed the hesitation in his shoulders, the small twitch near his mouth, rehearsed sincerity. Mum, he said, soft like a bruise. Can I come in? I stepped aside, not out of kindness, but curiosity. I wanted to see how far he'd go. He scanned the apartment as he entered. His eyes landed on the photo of me and Frank, still on the dresser. He blinked like it surprised him, as if I was supposed to have erased the past along with him. Nice place, he said. Simple. Enough for one, I replied. He sat without asking. At my table. My table. I didn't stop him. Let him feel the weight of hospitality once extended, now reclaimed. I wanted to talk, he began, face to face. You had my face in the passenger seat, I said calmly. You chose to drive away from it. He flinched, then leaned forward, hands clasped. I was under pressure. You don't understand what it's like with Lisa, with the kids. It's not that I wanted to leave you. I just didn't know how to manage everything. You didn't manage me, I said. You discarded me. He looked up, like that word offended him. That's not fair. I gave you a place, a home. We took care of you. I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I simply said, I wasn't furniture. You didn't take care of me. You tolerated me, until I made your kindness inconvenient. His eyes narrowed, and I saw it. The shift, the drop of the act, the moment when persuasion failed and control came forward. I just don't understand why you had to make it public, he said. The sale, the lawyer, the letter? You embarrassed us. That was the heart of it. Not pain, not remorse, embarrassment. I poured tea for myself, didn't offer him any. You did that on your own, I said. All I did was step out of the story. He stood then, quickly. Too quickly. His voice rising just a bit. You could have talked to me, privately. You didn't have to cut us off. I did, I said, because you weren't listening, and I was tired of asking to be heard. He looked around again, searching for weakness, an opening, a softened edge. I don't want to fight, Mom. This isn't a fight, I said. It's a door, and I'm standing in it. A long pause. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. The room felt too quiet for him. Men like him don't know what to do with stillness they can't fill. Finally, he reached into his coat and placed a card on the table. Our new address, he said, in case you ever want to see the kids. I didn't touch it. He waited. When I said nothing, he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. I guess that's that. No, I said. That was months ago. This is just the echo. He walked to the door, paused, looked back. I didn't. When it shut, I sat down, picked up the card, and dropped it in the trash. Then I finished my tea. He didn't come back. Not the next day. Not the next week. And I didn't expect him to. That kind of man doesn't return without a script, and I'd already stopped handing him lines. The apartment was quiet again, not from absence, but from balance. I swept the floors that Friday morning with the windows open, letting in the sounds of traffic, distant music, a barking dog. Life happened just outside, and it didn't ask anything of me. It simply let me be. I rearranged the pantry, bought a new kettle, red, enamel, with a soft whistle. The old one had begun to stick, the lid always just slightly ajar. Funny how even small things start to resist when they no longer belong. My mornings became sacred. Toast with apricot jam. A single boiled egg. The newspaper folded cleanly beside the plate. No one rushed me. No one commented on my salt intake. No one sat down late and sighed loudly while scrolling a phone. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just moves in when chaos leaves. I started walking the same loop every evening, down the block, past the laundromat, around the back alley with its graffiti fox someone kept painting over and over. I named him Quiet. A strange name, but fitting. He never changed his shape, just his colours. Sometimes I'd stop at the bench near the bakery, watch people come and go. Young couples with tired eyes and hopeful hands. Older men walking tiny dogs like they'd inherited them in someone's will. Teenagers with backpacks and slouched shoulders. The city was always changing, but my seat stayed the same. One afternoon, I ran into Margot. She was coming out of the florist with a bundle of stems in her hand, baby's breath, and something purple I didn't recognize. "Ms. Sutton," she said. I nodded. "Mary, please." She smiled, shy but sure. The rosemary's blooming again, and the roses, stubborn but holding. "They always were," I said. We talked briefly. She told me she painted the kitchen a light blue. I told her Frank had once tried to do the same, but ran out of paint halfway through and left it like that for a decade. She laughed. It was a good sound, unforced. "I hope the house treats you well," I said. She looked at me, steady. "It already has." That night, I made soup, lentils and carrot. I opened the window while it simmered, letting the scent drift out. Maybe someone walking by would smell it. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I was no longer performing nurture. I was simply feeding myself. I didn't dream of him much anymore. When I did, it wasn't the child version or the angry man. It was just a quiet shape in the distance, turning a corner. No malice, no longing. Just gone. I wrote his name in my notebook once. Not to remember, just to place it somewhere besides my chest. Then I closed the cover and returned it to the drawer. Sometimes healing doesn't look like celebration. It looks like finally exhaling without permission. It started with the woman in 2B. She knocked one morning, hesitant, holding a broken clock in both hands. "I heard you used to fix things," she said. "I never said that," I replied. "But I've had a long relationship with objects that refuse to behave." She smiled, not wide, but real. "Think you could take a look?" The clock was a cheap plastic thing, battery-operated, loud enough to wake ghosts. She said it belonged to her sister, who died 2 winters ago. She said she couldn't bear to throw it out, but it hadn't ticked since April. I sat at the kitchen table with a butter knife and a patience that comes from being underestimated. 20 minutes later, it clicked. Just a wire out of place. Nothing tragic. I handed it back. She cradled it like it had started breathing again. From then on, word spread. Not fast, not loud, just neighbor to neighbor. One needed help carrying groceries. One wanted to know how to set up online banking. One knocked and said, "My daughter wants me to sell the house and move in with her. Can I ask you something?" I never offered advice. I just listened, asked questions, made tea. One woman brought over a lasagna. Another baked bread so heavy it could anchor a boat. I accepted it all. It wasn't charity, it was recognition. We didn't sit in circles or call it community. We just began to notice each other. The woman from 2B, her name was Hattie, came by weekly now. Sometimes with laundry questions, sometimes with just her silence. She liked to sit at my window and watch the world drift. One afternoon, she said, "You know, you walk like someone who's come home." "I have," I said, "but not to a place, to myself." She nodded, her chin trembling just a little. We didn't talk about children much, but sometimes it slipped in. Edges of stories. Sons who forgot birthdays. Daughters who made decisions without asking. Grandchildren they only saw on screens. There was no bitterness. Just the kind of mourning that doesn't need funerals. I began writing in the evenings again. Not journals. Observations. Phrases. Lines that came like old songs. I kept them in a drawer beside the photo of Frank, who once said, "Write it down, Mary. That way, it doesn't get to rewrite itself." One morning, Hattie brought someone new. A woman in her 70s, sharp eyes, thin wrists, unsure hands. "She just moved in," Hattie said. "Can't get her hot water to work, and her daughter told her to stop calling." I let her in, made tea, listened. She didn't ask for help. She just needed to say things out loud. That's what most of them needed. Not fixing, not advice. Just a room where their words didn't evaporate. We weren't building a movement. We weren't even building friendship in the way young people define it. We were just refusing to disappear. It didn't end with applause. There was no grand finale, no sudden visit with remorse in his eyes, no letter tucked in the mailbox with trembling handwriting. He stayed gone. I stayed still. That was enough. Life didn't become dramatic. It became steady. I woke early. Not out of habit, but because morning had become a quiet kind of joy. The kettle whistled. The toast browned just right. I knew how long to steep the tea to keep it from bitterness. I walked most days. The same route, the same bench. Sometimes with Hattie, sometimes alone. A few neighbours nodded as they passed, others didn't. None of it mattered. I wasn't looking for recognition. What mattered was how my body moved without bracing anymore. I no longer held my breath when the phone rang. I didn't flinch when someone mentioned sons or family holidays. I didn't rush to fill silences with explanations. I had stopped being afraid of my own stillness. One afternoon, I found a note tucked under my door. Folded once. No name. Thank you for showing us it's allowed. To leave without slamming the door. To stay without asking permission. To live as if we matter. I read it once. Then again. I didn't cry. But I placed it in the drawer beside Frank's photo and the old rosary I hadn't used in years. Not because I needed it to remember, but because something in me wanted it kept. Later that week, the local librarian asked if I'd come speak to a small group of women, retired, recently widowed, or just quietly fading inside their own lives. I declined. I'm not a speaker, I said. I'm a woman who stopped waiting. She smiled. That's exactly what they need to hear. Maybe one day I'll go, maybe not. I've learned the difference between being needed and being consumed. Instead, I wrote it down. All of it. Not for revenge, not even for legacy. Just so it existed somewhere. So if one woman, one day, finds herself on a bench with her bags at her feet and silence in her throat, she'll know she's not alone. They may forget your birthday, misremember your sacrifice, call your boundaries bitterness. But they can't unwrite the moment you stood up and walked toward your own life. I don't live loudly now. I live fully. That's enough. The door remains unlocked during the day. The window stays open when it rains. The mint plant grows wide, almost wild, refusing to stay in its pot. I don't trim it anymore. I let it sprawl. Let them call it messy. I call it mine. If you've ever rebuilt not a life, but a self, if you've chosen solitude over suffering and called it peace, if you've looked in the mirror and whispered, I'm still here, then thank you for reading Grandma True Stories. Not because we need followers, but because sometimes the quietest voices hold the loudest truths.